Father in heaven, we come before you again this Sabbath morning, and we ask that you would be with us, grace us with your spirit of prophecy, the spirit of Yeshua that enlightened the prophets of old. And Father, as we see the culmination of events coming to pass prior to your coming, we ask that you would help us to understand these things so that we can fortify our own minds and that of our families and those around us. We ask that you would be with us today. We pray in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen.
So we've been working on this little horn concept, who it is. Lots of ideas out there right now. There's historical figures. Antiochus Epiphanes, he was deemed in the historical application of this prophecy that we've been looking at in Daniel 7 and 8 as the little horn. He polluted the sanctuary. Most of us understand all that, but really he didn't fit. Definitely could be an application, if you will, but not a fulfillment of the prophecies. And so there has been historical applications of these prophecies, but they don't fit. Once you really start to examine verse by verse, we can see that they don't fit. So we've been looking at the concept that this little horn actually is in the future. I would say in the world right now, it just hasn't come on the world stage, being who it's going to be. And so we want to know in advance, and that's what we're looking at. We've proposed that it is the Church of Rome, this little horn power, which will gain influence over the whole world, which we can see it has in the past, ruled Europe at one time, and now it's going to make its move on the world stage. Slowly getting to that place, and the prophecies indicate that it will take control of the whole world before this is all over, before Yeshua comes. So that's what we're looking at in these prophecies. So we saw in, just going to bring us up to speed a little bit in Daniel. We want to go through some things here, because this is going to pull us into the book of Revelation, is where we want to end up here, because that's the real revelation of who this little horn power is and who it's going to become. And it really lays a good groundwork for the identifying of it. But we start in the book of Daniel, and as I've said before, Daniel is the foundation for the book of Revelation. So those that are trying to figure out the book of Revelation without having a really good, solid understanding of the book of Daniel, they're going to come up with shortfalls in their understanding, and that's because, you can't build a house without a foundation. It's just not going to last when the storm comes. And so we want to get the foundation nice and sure before we launch into Revelation. So Daniel 7:3, 4 beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. After this, we're just going to look at a few verses just to get the gist of the whole chapter. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all other beasts that were before it. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. We don't get any details in this part of the vision, so we can't just assume that we know what this is talking about. We don't know until we get to the interpretation what these symbols are, and we find out that these are kingdoms. The first was like a lion that had eagle's wings. The second was a bear that had 3 ribs in its mouth. And the third was a leopard, a 4-headed leopard. And this fourth beast is the one that we're focused in on, because that's the one that Daniel focused in on. And that's why The reason why he did that was because that's where persecution started. When the fourth beast came along stream, it was making huge claims and trampling the residue with his feet. We find out a little later on that this trampling of the residue, the remnant, is the residue, and it's persecuting God's people. And we see this as we're going to go into Revelation. We see this exactly the same thing going on. And we're going to notice that. And the reason why we're looking at this is just to refresh our memory so that when we jump into Revelation, these verses are going to come back to our minds, and it's going to be like deja vu. We've seen this before. So we've got a kingdom here that's made up of several kings. It's got 10 horns, and we're not left to guess at what this is because we're told. So there's a little horn that comes up among them, and 3 of the first horns are plucked up by the roots. So if we're told here that we're going to see this, we're told that these 10 horns are 10 kings, and then there's another horn that comes up and plucks 3 out of the rest. So how many do we have? Just simple mathematical equation. We have 10 minus 3 that are uprooted to make way for the little horn to gain prominence. And once this happens, it's game on for persecution because he gains power in this whole beast. So the pictures really are telling the story. And right after that, after this persecuting power comes on stream, starts to trample God's people, it goes on to say, I watched till thrones were put in place. The Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were open. This picture that we have here is a judgment scene, a court scene, if you will, and thrones were put in place. Multiple thrones were put in place. Well, how many thrones? Well, when we go to the book of Revelation, we're not going to go there right now, but we can see this is expanded upon in Revelation chapter 6, and it says that there were 24 thrones around the throne, and this is where the elders sit. And it tells us there in Revelation that these were out of all the nations of the earth, and they're sitting during the judgment. They're sitting around the throne. What are they doing? Well, they're sitting co-reigning, if you will, with Yeshua and the Father at the time of this judgment. So when is the time of this judgment? Well, in the prophecies, this judgment is during the time that the little horn is reigning. We can't miss that point. This is critical for us to understand because we see this judgment right in the midst of this little horn that's doing the speaking and persecuting. And that kind of makes sense that God would, in a sense, say, enough is enough. We've all seen enough here in the court, and we're going to execute judgment. It goes on to say in Daniel chapter 7:11, I watched them because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Now, what it looks like here is the fourth beast is slain. But once we get to Revelation, this kind of develops, and we can see here that it's actually this little horn is a beast power as well. He's a kingdom. The beast is a kingdom as well that it sits on. But the little horn is a bit of a beast himself, doing all this destruction of God's people. So what looks like to here is that this whole beast is slain, but once we get into Revelation, we're going to see this very clearly, that it's not the beast that was slain, it's the little horn that was actually slain, and its body is destroyed and given to the burning flame. So what's going on here? If this beast survives, that would mean that there was 7 kingdoms that were left over after the little horn was destroyed. And this is going to make perfect sense once we go into the book of Revelation. We're going to see how that actually works. And so this is another reason why you cannot take one prophecy. You've got to add things together so that you have enough data to make a good, sound decision on what it's actually talking about. So we're using information that I've gleaned over the years to pull this in and pinpoint. It's the little horn here that's destroyed and is given to the burning flame. Then it goes on to say, as for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, and yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. And once we get into the book of Revelation, we're going to see exactly what this is talking about. So these are kingdoms that when the little horn is destroyed, those kingdoms live on. And this is very important because in different applications of this prophecy, we see here people have assumed that the lion, the bear, and the leopard have been removed from the scene by the time the 4th beast comes on stage. But we can see, if we just look at the prophecy, that the rest of the beasts, these other beasts, live on past the time that the little horn is destroyed. And again, the reason why I'm bringing this up, because we're going to see clearly in Revelation how this all happens. And so we're going to actually verify this information once we get into the book of Revelation. Goes on to say, after that, after these beasts are still alive, I watched in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Yeshua actually quoted this to Caiaphas, and this is what enraged Caiaphas, because Caiaphas was well aware of Daniel, of the book of Daniel, and what it said. When Yeshua said that you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, he actually was basically quoting these verses, and that's when Caiaphas tore his clothes, because he knew that he was declaring at that point that he was indeed the Son of God. Goes on to say, then to him was given a dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Now, I almost took a detour right here because, you know, we want to share the gospel with people. What we're looking at, the harlot and the little horn and the 4 kings and all the persecution, that's not really good news, is it? The good news of the gospel is that Yeshua is going to receive the kingdom, and he will ask us to reign with him. That's kind of a big idea, but the Bible is very clear on that. And so that's really the good news, is that everything that we have to go through today, all the pains, if you will, that we have to go through, all the persecution that we will yet go through, God and his Son are going to make it up to us throughout eternity. And that's really the gospel, is that everything that we have to go through is going to be well taken care of. And we are going to be quite happy about that. Yeshua said that he saw the travail of his soul and was satisfied. If we look into the future as Yeshua looked into the future and saw the blessings of the redeemed, that by faith, if we can do that by faith and grab these promises, they will lift us out of the challenges that we have today, and we will be able to get through everything that we need to get through. So the promises of the gospel are really the power of God working in our lives to hang on. We need to hang on to the faith that we have. All right, so here we go. In the interpretation, the 10 horns are 10 kings. No room for discussion on what this is. The horns represent 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the other ones and subdue 3 kings. So this little horn subdues these three kingdoms. So it's just a mathematical equation, 10 minus 3 equals 7. Plus you have a different one. So there's an addition, and that's going to carry forward into the book of Revelation as well. Tells us here that this kingdom, he shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. And we've looked at these things before, but one thing that I think is very important here is Daniel. It tells us in the first couple verses of Daniel, he has this dream and he's going to tell us the main facts. So obviously we don't have every detail, but apparently the main facts here is that there's going to be persecution against God's people. And it tells us right in this verse how that persecution is going to happen. This power is going to change times. What times? God's appointed times. So this is part of the persecution. They will make laws that will restrict the worship of any gods in the world. This has been seen in Daniel's life in Babylon. We saw this happen to him, that they were only allowed to worship according to the state worship guidelines. So we see here not only what's happening in the future, but we can see what's happened in the past. And in Daniel's own experience, he had this applied to himself. And he saw that in the future, at the end of time, just prior to Yeshua's coming, they will do this again. There will be a state or a world religion, and they will restrict times of worship. In other words, God's holy days will be illegal to keep, and it will only be the state days that are said to be holy that we will be able to keep, and also law. So it's a changing of times, which are in the law of God, and also the laws of God themselves. So there will be aspects of God's law where you will not be able to do these things. We saw this in the time of Constantine when he was persecuting the Jews, and the Christians felt that persecution because they were doing the same thing as the Jews. They were keeping the festivals, the Sabbath, even things like circumcision, and these things were being kept by not only Jews, but also the Christians back in that time as well. And it says, then the saints will be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. And of course, we've looked at these words. We're not going to look at them now. A time is translated a year. So we have 1 year, 2 years, and a half a year being 3.5 years. Most Bible scholars recognize that this would be a 3.5 year period. We know, historically speaking, historical applications of this prophecy, they have turned this into a day equals a year. And I just want to say with that, we've done some serious homework on that, and we are putting a book together that actually demonstrates, although it's been applied in history, the actual day for year prophetic understanding does not hold up under some close investigation. And so we have a book coming out, Re-examining 1844, which deals with all of the historical applications regarding that. So we'll have an article up on the website under articles on the day for year principle. So I know there's a lot of discussion on that. People are really starting to ask questions. Does the historical application actually work as well as some people declare that it works? The answer to that question, it works pretty well, but it doesn't work perfectly. And so we have to look for something that works. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here. So we see this times a half, and what we're seeing here is that this is a 3.5 year period. It's not a 1260 year period, but a 3.5 year period in the time of the end, just prior to when Yeshua returns. And it says, but the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. So let's just pull all these texts together here. We have 4 beasts. We have a beast, the 4th beast, that has 10 horns. 3 are uprooted. It's left with 7. And then there's this little horn that gains control of the whole world. It tells us that in this prophecy. It gains control of the whole world and starts persecuting, actually has these other beasts, these other kingdoms start persecuting God's people. And so this will turn into a one world system that will have a one world religion. And once we get into Revelation, we can see exactly why that happens. We'll get there. But the idea is that all other religions, except for the state religion, will be outlawed. And we can see this clearly in Revelation. It tells us that the whole world worship the beast. So this is where we're going, one world religion, and it will be made law. Court shall be seated, they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. And here it's talking specifically about the little horn, and this kind of piggybacks on what we looked at earlier when it said the beast was destroyed, primarily talking about the little horn. The little horn is the one that's destroyed forever after the 3.5 year period, leaves no room for a resurrection, so this placing it just prior to the time of Yeshua. But the other beasts are living on. I make that point because we're going to see in Revelation how that actually plays out when we get into some more repeat and enlarge concepts. So it's destroyed forever because the court is seated. So in the time frame now, it only has 3.5 years. So the court is seated and it takes away his dominion. So that would indicate that the court has to be seated prior to the ending of the 3.5 years. Now, we don't know at this point how long the court's going to be seated for, but definitely the court has to be seated before the little horn is destroyed and during the time of the 3.5 years. This is a very important point because this helps us a lot, especially we're going to see this same time period in the book of Revelation, and we're going to see this little horn who is going to morph into a harlot, going to be called a harlot in the book of Revelation, and we're going to see that it has the same powers as this little horn. Really, the only conclusion we're going to come to, as we're going to see, is this little horn power has to be the harlot of the book of Revelation. Okay, so when we get to the book of Revelation, we see something interesting again. We see Revelation 12, verse 3, and another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head. Here again, we've got to look at the pictures because the pictures are what's telling the story. The words are just describing the picture. So we have to put this whole thing together. So we have a beast here called the fiery red dragon. It has 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on its head. Now this looks an awful lot like this dreadful beast that we see in Daniel chapter 7. At least the numbers are identical. Why are they identical? It has 10 horns, which is what the beast in Daniel 7 had. It has 7 heads. This beast has 7 heads. Well, the 7 heads would represent the ruling powers that govern this beast. So there's 3 that are not in control of this beast. It's the 7 heads, which is what was left over after the little horn came on stream in Daniel chapter 7. Also, it tells us that it has 7 crowns, or 7 diadems, which is the same word as crowns as we're going to see in Revelation 13. Same word. So this beast has 7 crowns. What would the crowns represent? They would represent the 7 heads that are governing. So the 7 heads are the kingdoms that rule over this beast. But at the same time, it has these other kings, but they've been subdued, as it were, in Daniel 7, uprooted to make way for this little horn. So they are still in the kingdom, but they have no ruling power. Goes on to say in Revelation 12:13, now when the dragon saw that he'd been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. So who's the male child? The male child is kind of an interesting. If we go back at the time of Yeshua, which most expositors will determine that this is at the time of Yeshua, what power was there at the time of Yeshua? This was the Roman power. The Roman powers ruled those areas at this time when Yeshua was born. So this is a little bit of a clue of what is going on here. But at the end, we saw in Isaiah that this woman, God's church, is going to give birth to many offspring. And as we looked at this, Isaiah, but it talks about this woman, God's church, giving birth, as it were, to a nation in a day. So this is at the time of the end, they're going to give birth to a nation, and they're called the 144,000, and they're of Israel. So that is going to happen again, and the woman, this dragon, is going to persecute the woman and the rest of her offspring, which are God's people here in the time of the end. Goes on to tell us, Revelation 12:14, and the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and a half a time from the presence of the serpent. So we see here again, without question, we've got the same time period. So that should be a number 1 clue here, is we could be talking about the same power that was back in the time that Daniel had his vision. This dreadful beast that tramples the residue with his feet, that's told that he was going to persecute God's people, make war against the saints. This is exactly the same thing that we see with this dragon. This dragon represents a portion of the world that will persecute God's people. They will be the number 1 persecutor in the world, and then the influence of this beast will influence the rest of the world, and the rest of the world will persecute God's people as well. So it tells us here again that it only does this for a time, times, and a half a time. And that's the same time period that we saw in Daniel. So in Daniel 25 tells us that he shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, shall intend to change times and law. And here we go, the persecution that we see. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half. And we saw there that it was the little horn power that began, it was under his influence that the persecution started. So this dragon, we just see the 7 heads and 10 horns. We see the persecution, so we have to ask the question, well, where's the little horn in all of this? And we're gonna see that here. The little horn is going to be there. The dragon in 12:17, the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yeshua. And we saw in Revelation 19:10, the testimony of Yeshua is the spirit of prophecy. So it's a group of people that are keeping God's commandments, and it's interesting that it tells us here they're keeping God's commandments. Daniel chapter 7:25 tells us that the little horn changes God's sacred times and law. So if the little horn makes it illegal to worship God according to the dictates of his word, And those people that are being persecuted are keeping God's commandments. In other words, they're becoming enemies of the state, if you will. It puts those things together, and we can see, oh, these people are keeping God's commandments. These people are creating laws against God's commandment. There's where the persecution is coming from. It will come to the place where it will be a death penalty if you do not worship according to the state. And that's the persecution that happens because Satan is influencing world governments to wipe out God's people so that he will gain full control over this earth. That's his whole intent. He doesn't seem to believe God, that God is going to have a remnant. He is going to do everything he can to defeat God's people. And we saw this on our Wednesday night Bible study. We talked a little bit about this. And this really deserves some serious study. But we talked about the idea of Job. Job seems to be, as we read the book of Job, he seems to be almost the last man standing when God asked him what he'd been up to and did he notice his servant Job. In the time of the end, the same thing's going to be going on. Is Job, or Satan, is going to annihilate God's people. He's trying to destroy the faith in God's people. He's doing everything he can so that they will give up their faith. It is so important for us to develop our faith so that when the time comes, we will be able to stand against all opposition, because the opposition is coming. And we can see that as we're looking out and what's going on in the world today. We can see opposition to God's ways even now. So the dragon was enraged with the woman, went to make war with the rest of her offspring who were obedient to God and have the testimony of Yeshua, which is the ability, God's people will have the ability to know what's coming. They will have the ability to demonstrate who the bad guys are out there, and we will be able to navigate through. It will be a roadmap. The spirit of prophecy is given as a roadmap for us to navigate through the difficult challenges that we're going to have in the time of the end. And I do believe that even when it comes right down to it, and we are being persecuted like this is talking about, and we flee into the wilderness, so to speak, God will direct our ways. And just like Elijah, as he was running from the harlot, Ahab's wife, as he was running, he was getting fed by the ravens in the wilderness. And God actually gave him food to get through. And so this is interesting. All these little stories are to help us understand that ultimately God is going to be in control and he will help his people through all of this time. I would not be surprised if at this time in Earth's history that God's people will be fed manna in the wilderness. Has that ever happened before? I think so. Yeah, we know those stories. Those stories are for us upon whom the end of the ages have come. This is good news, because if we were just left to fight the beast all by ourselves, we would never make it through. So here we see again in Revelation chapter 12, the times and a half, paralleling Daniel's beast, his fourth beast as well. Now we get to Revelation 17, verse 1. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the harlot, who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So here we have a harlot now come on stream. So we've had in Revelation chapter 12, we've had a scarlet-colored beast with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns, indicating that there will be a kingdom that is portrayed here that has 7 major players, 7 major kings that are dictating what's going on. And then we see this harlot comes on stream. And so what we're indicating here, I believe what the Bible's indicating here, is as we go on in Revelation 17:3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet-colored beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Revelation 17:12 or 12:17, sorry. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yeshua, the Messiah. So here we see again the bigger picture. Okay, the reason why this fourth beast, the fourth beast in Daniel, was governed by the little horn, does all the same things for exactly the same amount of time as the dragon in Revelation 17. The characteristics of the dragon in Revelation 12, with the 10 horns, 7 heads, same characteristics, same time period that's involved. And the little horn is the one that ruled the beast in Daniel. And here we see the harlot is the one that rules the beast in Revelation 12 and 17. So we see here, definitely, we've got so many things that are the same. I do believe we can put these together. It is a repeat and enlargement. Now we're not going from within Daniel itself, repeat and enlarge, which it does, but we're going from Daniel to Revelation and getting repeat and enlarge. In other words, we need Daniel and Revelation together to get the greater view of what's actually going on. So we can see here that the dragon and the fourth beast are the same entities, and the little horn and the harlot are also the same entities. Revelation 17, 12, 13, and 15, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. So they have given their sovereignty over to the beast. And we can see that that's just something that happens. We can see that with the UN power today, is there are kingdoms in the world that are giving their sovereignty to this larger entity. And if this larger entity decides to do something, i.e. if there's some kind of pandemic, that they will have sovereignty over the individual nations, and they will tell the nations what to do. We can see the groundwork on this being laid right now. It's not hard to imagine how this would happen. Maybe 20 years ago we wouldn't have really believed this, but now we can see all of these things that in Scripture, we can actually see these things coming to fruition, and we can start to name these beasts, who they are, what they represent, and we can start to see exactly who they are. And it's interesting in my mind that the understanding of these visions are on time. Just before they're going to be played out, God is giving an understanding of what these symbols represent so that we can be ready for this time when it happens. And we can see these things developing now. These are of one mind. They will give their power and authority or sovereignty to the beast. They will hand over their sovereignty. Whatever the beast says, whatever this order says, that's led by the little horn and the harlot. So the harlot actually will be telling the whole beast power, all these kingdoms, what to do. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So no confusion on what the harlot represents here is that it's a power sitting on peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So it's not just one kingdom here. We've got many kingdoms involved. In fact, this harlot will rule over the whole world at a certain point in this earth's history. Now we're going to move a little bit forward here. We're going to go into Revelation 13, and we're going to see something in Revelation 13 that parallels this, but it's added information. It's a repeat and enlarge. It says, then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. So what is going on here? I want to let's just do a little review here. We saw a fourth beast that was dreadful and terrible in Daniel chapter 7, and then later on in the interpretation, it says that this fourth beast with the little horn governing consumes the whole world. In other words, it takes control of the whole world. If the beast of Revelation chapter 12, the dragon with 7 heads, is that same beast, then the little horn power takes control, starts persecuting first in its area of the world, and then that persecution spreads through the influence of the little horn in that fourth beast. And then all the kingdoms will persecute God's people in the time of the end. This is what's portrayed in Daniel. Revelation now, we get to Revelation, we see that fourth beast. That fourth beast begins the persecution in Revelation chapter 12, and then it consumes or devours the whole earth again, and we can see that in the beast that comes on stage. That beast has 10 horns, it has 7 heads, but it has 10 crowns. The beast of Revelation 12 only had 7 crowns. Why does this beast have 3 more crowns? Well, it goes on to tell us exactly how it happens. Now, the beast which I saw was like a leopard. The feet were the feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. The dragon is in control. The 7 heads represent 7 kingdoms that controlled the fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation 12. Same beast, Revelation 12, Revelation 7, fourth beast, same beast. And now it amalgamates itself with the rest of the beasts. You remember in Daniel 7 when it said, as for the rest of their beasts, they had their dominions taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. We can see here in the time of the end, this is what John is trying to tell us here. The fourth beast now consumes the other kingdoms of the world, made up of a leopard, a bear, and a lion. So we've done some homework in this. We can see here the most powerful nations or nation blocks in the world. Number 1 would be the United States of America, Great Britain, Russia, China, and the European Union bloc. It's interesting to note that when we go from Daniel to Revelation, there's no sign of an eagle here. We don't want to forget that. That's very important. So the eagle does not move forward. Why doesn't it move forward? Because the eagle was plucked off the lion. And we saw in Daniel chapter 8 is this notable horn, and the notable horn was broken off of this system. We're not going to get into Daniel 8 now, but we see a repeat and enlarge in Daniel 8, piggybacking on this concept itself. So the beast was like a leopard, so there's another kingdom there, and the bear kingdom is added into this, and the lion demonstrated that this now is an amalgamation of the most powerful nations in the world. And so now we need to do a little bit of math, and we can see here that we have the 10 horns represented here, the 10 crowns, the influencing the additional 3 crowns, or these additional kingdoms, when they come on stage, and we have a one world system now working in unison, and we're going to see what they're going to do. They will persecute God's people as well. We can see that here. Revelation 13, 5 through 6. And he was given a mouth speaking great things. This is exactly the same terminology we saw in Daniel chapter 7. This mouth speaking pompous words or great words. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Interestingly enough, this isn't times and a half, but when we do the math, 42 months would be a 3.5-year period, exactly the same thing. So the mouth that this beast is given, very, very important here that we need to read it for what it says. The beast was made up with 7 heads, It had a lion's mouth, body of a leopard, feet of a bear, and then once this beast is made up, it's given a mouth. The mouth is not the beast, it's an add-on to the beast. Then he opened his mouth to blaspheme against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. This is a repeat and enlarge of what we saw in Revelation or Daniel chapter 8, when it makes war against the saints. Daniel chapter 7, the same thing. Same thing that's going on. So this mouth does all this thing. I'm proposing that that mouth is that little horn that did all those things in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8. And we can see this little horn actually in Revelation chapter 10 through 12, which is the same prophecy as all of this, just much more detailed. But we can see the little horn working in those chapters as well. So we see here now that this beast, as we saw in Daniel 7, that tells us in the interpretation that this little horn consumes the whole world. We see a repeat and enlarge in Daniel chapter 7, that these kingdoms, they were literal kingdoms in Daniel chapter 7. I would have to assume that they are literal kingdoms in in Revelation chapter 13. But in Revelation chapter 13, it gives us a little more detail on how they all come together and ultimately persecute God's people. And we see the persecution in Revelation chapter 13 as the mark of the beast. We didn't see the mark of the beast in Daniel chapter 7, at least not on the surface. I would propose that the mark of the beast has everything to do against God's commandments and his holy days. So the mark of the beast is the mark or the authority of the beast to make a one world religion and a state religion. So we can look at it in those terms. You know, there's a lot of people looking at the idea that this beast power could be so-and-so, and I don't even want to list some of the names that are involved here. But when you look at all the data and bring all the data to fruition, we can see here that there's no way that it can be anything else than the Roman Catholic Church assuming the role as God's representative here on earth and dictating the worship system that is going to be approved by the whole world in the time of the end. The Roman Catholic Church is that harlot that will control the whole world. This is what it's had its target on. This is what, through the Dark Ages, its desire was to rule the whole world then. Didn't succeed, but it will for a time succeed in the very near future. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. This is when it gains control of the whole earth. The 10 horns or 10 kings which you saw on the beast will hate the harlot, make her desolate, naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it into his heart, or their hearts, to fulfill his purpose, which is judgment, to be of one mind, to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. So we see here the 10 kingdoms that make up this beast will turn on the harlot. And I rather suspect they're going to realize at some point the evilness of the harlot, and they will destroy the harlot. And it tells us how that's going to come to fruition. And we can see this from Daniel chapter 7, where it says the rest of the beasts live on after this power, after this little horn power, after this harlot power has been destroyed by fire. The woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. And we see in Revelation 18 that great city is Babylon, meaning confusion. And what has she done? She's mixed the wine. This wine of Babylon has been mixed. False doctrine, false teachings, and the whole world has been carried away by these false teachings of the wine of this Babylonian power. So here we have kind of pulling some thoughts together. Revelation 12, we have 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns. In Revelation 13, we have 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 crowns. Now, why? Because the amalgamation of this beast of Revelation 12 has come together with the beasts in the other parts of the world. The body is like a leopard, feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion. And we need to realize, this is very important, that we have no eagle's wings. So everything in Daniel chapter 7 was carried forward except for the eagle's wings. Why? Because in Daniel 7, it tells us that the eagle's wings were plucked off. So this new world system moves forward without the eagle. What happened to the eagle? Well, we're going to see that in Revelation 13. We're not going to look at that today, but we can see in Revelation 13 what happened to that eagle. Revelation 17 tells us the woman sits on a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. The Samson and Delilah, do you remember that dialogue, that history, that bit of history back in the Old Testament, where he has this riddle? And I find it kind of amazing that there's these riddles in prophecy that we really need to figure out, and it takes wisdom to figure it out. There was something about that was sweet in the belly of the eater. You remember that story, I'm sure you do. Well, we have something here that's like a riddle. In Revelation chapter 12, we see 7 heads and 10 horns with 7 crowns. And in Revelation 13, we have 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 crowns. We see a difference of 3 crowns. In Revelation 17, something is very, very interesting. In Revelation 17, where it talks about the harlot sitting on this beast, it could apply to either one of these beasts because it doesn't give a full description of the beast. Are you with me? In Revelation 17, it just says that the woman sits on a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast of Revelation 12 has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast of Revelation has 7 heads and 10 horns. The detail of the 7 crowns is given individually on those, but it's not given in Revelation 17. This has led to some confusion, but this is how it works. We can see this from Daniel chapter 7, is the persecution starts with the beast with 7 horns that has the little horn. This is exactly the same thing we get to Revelation chapter 12. The persecution starts with that beast. I would propose that that beast has the little horn on it, represented as the harlot. We have in Revelation 17 a harlot sitting on a beast that fits the description of the Revelation chapter 12 beast. 7 heads, 10 horns. Doesn't say anything about the crowns in Revelation 17. When we get to Revelation 13, the harlot could be sitting on that beast as well because it fits the description of Revelation 17. It has 7 heads and 10 horns. The additional information, this beast has 10 crowns. So what I'm proposing is the persecution starts with the Revelation 12 beast. Then once it amalgamates with the rest of the kingdoms of the world, the harlot sits on that beast as well. So there's a transition. It starts with Revelation 12. It amalgamates with the rest of the kingdoms. The harlot is sitting on that beast as well. I believe it's a bit of a puzzle that God has given us. He hasn't indicated which beast it is because it's both, actually. So once the harlot gains control of the whole world, it now sits on that scarlet-colored beast that's made up of all the major kingdoms of the world. And this is what we see in Revelation chapter 12 and 13 and 17. Now, when we go to Revelation 17, we see something else that's interesting that draws our attention back to Daniel chapter 7. Revelation 17 verse 16 tells us, "And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, These will hate the harlot, make her desolate, and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. And we can see this is what happens in Revelation 17. I'm proposing that this is exactly the same thing that we saw in in Daniel chapter 7, is that these kingdoms, it says that God burns this little horn with fire. This is exactly the same picture once we see in Revelation 17, not talking about a little horn anymore, but in Revelation 17, it's called a harlot, and she also is burned with fire. It goes on in Revelation 17:17 to tell us, for God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind and give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. What is going on here? This is a judgment that's been executed against the harlot, which is exactly the same thing that we saw in Daniel chapter 7. This little horn reigned for this length of time, times and a half. The same length of time we see this mouth speaking great things, or the harlot that sits on this beast. This beast, with this harlot sitting on it, the harlot is given 42 months, which is the same time period. Daniel chapter 7, we see the little horn is destroyed by fire. We see that's a product of a judgment that had to happen prior to this, and that was the executive phase of the judgment. When we go to Revelation 13, you're going to have to do some homework here. Revelation 13, we also see a judgment that is behind the time period of the 42 months. So we see there's a judgment, a destruction of the harlot by the kings of the earth, because God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, and that is to execute judgment on the harlot. Does this actually make sense? It makes sense when you go back into the history. If we learn the lessons of history, God many times has caused judgment to happen upon Israel by the other nations of the world. So this is consistent, actually, with how God has worked in the past. In Daniel 7:11, I watched then because of the sounds of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, its body destroyed, and given to the burning flame. Something else in Leviticus we want to look at, Leviticus 21 verse 9, the daughter of any priest of Israel, the daughter of any priest, if she profanes herself by playing the harlot, she profanes her father, she shall be burned with fire. Previous to this, I indicated that this harlot is a church power. If we go back into the beginnings of the Church of Rome, we can see very clearly that it began under the influence of the likes of Paul and Peter and those that followed on their heels. This was a pure church at one time. So this fits the profile of how God has worked in the past. He has said in the past that his church, Israel of old, had become a harlot, even Jerusalem, referring to Jerusalem as a harlot. This we can see here in the future as the harlot in the pure church gone astray, when it culminates in the harlot's work in the time of the end, ends up persecuting God's people. This is exactly the same thing that we saw in the Old Testament. The likes of Ahab, they were persecuting God's people, and any good influences against Israel, meaning God's prophets, they were either executed or shunned. We can read about this all through the book of Kings, how this happened. So God's church that he began and was pure at first, starting with Abraham for 2,000 years all the way through, culminating in the rejection of their Messiah, we can see here another 2,000 years has transpired when God's true holy church had its new beginnings in Rome once Jerusalem was destroyed. It started from there and went to the rest of the world, and now 2,000 years later becomes corrupt and now persecuting God's people again. And God says, enough is enough. And just as he burned Jerusalem in 70 AD to the ground, he is going to burn Jerusalem to the ground again once the little horn gains control, as we saw in Daniel chapter 8, when it goes south, goes east, and ends up in the glorious land as we've been putting these pieces together. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away. So at the time that the little horn or the harlot is destroyed, they have their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. What is going on here? Once the harlot is destroyed, these beasts live on. Why do they live on? Because Yeshua hasn't shown up yet. This is why they're living on. Goes on to say, after they live on for a while, it says, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind. They will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords, King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. So we see here that after the little horn, or after the harlot is destroyed, there is a time period. In Daniel chapter 7, it says a season and a time. We're not going to get into how long that is. It's a brief period of time until Yeshua comes. And it will be at this time that the counterfeit Antichrist comes and brings the whole world together again prior to Yeshua coming. But we're told here at Yeshua's coming that in Revelation 19, when Yeshua shows up, it says, I saw the beast, the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. So this beast is still alive and well, made up of the kings of the earth, but you'll notice there is no harlot in this picture. That's because the harlot was destroyed by the kings of the earth. Goes on then, and it says, the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet, who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast, and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. So at the time that Yeshua comes back, he destroys this beast as well with the kings of the earth, and it goes on to tell us in Revelation 19, the rest are killed with the sword that proceeds out of his mouth. The only ones at this time, as we've seen before, the only ones that are alive at this time are the wicked and the righteous. And the righteous, it tells us, are made up of 144,000. And at this time, there is a resurrection as well. We're gonna end there. That's the good news of all of this prophecy, is God's people will endure unto the end, just as he said in Matthew 24. Those that endure the end will be saved. At this time, there will be a resurrection. Now, we may want to talk a little bit about this false prophet. If we can identify who the false prophet is by the signs that he works in the presence of the beast. This is Revelation 13. We're not going to get into that right now, but this false prophet is the second beast of Revelation 13. This identifies who the false prophet is. It's the beast that has two horns like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon, and he makes an image to the beast. In other words, where this kingdom is, it duplicates the system of this beast power and the harlot power. It duplicates the system of that, and now it starts persecuting those that live in that area of the world. So I want to leave it at that point now. We want to open it up to some discussion, but before we do that, let's have a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you again for your word. Father, we thank you for giving us insights into these prophecies that we can see what's going to happen before it does. We ask that you continue to bless our efforts as we study your word. And Father, we want to continually ask that you finish the work that you've started in us so that we will be able to stand when you return, whether we sleep or whether we're awake. Father, we want to be ready for that time. We pray this in Yeshua's name. Amen.